There is a specific kind of openness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a declaration or a clear signal that most people would recognize if they were looking for it. It builds quietly in the space between ordinary moments, carried in behavior so subtle that most men walk right past it without ever registering what they just saw. And later, sometimes much later, they realize the invitation was there the whole time. They just didn't know how to read it. Most people assume that when a woman is ready to give herself to someone, it becomes obvious that there's a shift in how she talks, how she moves, how she looks at him, something unmistakable. And sometimes that's true. But what most people don't realize is that the deeper, more meaningful signals tend to arrive long before the obvious ones. They arrive quietly, embedded in the ordinary texture of daily life, visible only to someone who has learned to pay attention to the right things. Stay with me here, because understanding what these signs actually mean and why they appear the way they do changes the way you understand every relationship you'll ever be in. Think about what it actually costs a woman to give herself to someone, not just physically, but fully, emotionally, in the complete sense. It is not a small thing. It is the decision to trust that another person will handle the most unguarded version of her with care, that being seen without her defenses in place will not be used against her, that the parts of herself she doesn't perform for the world are safe in his hands. This decision doesn't happen all at once. It builds in layers, tested quietly, piece by piece, over time, and as it builds, it leaves traces. This is where things become interesting. The first sign is one almost nobody talks about, and it's this. She starts being honest about the things she doesn't like. Not about the big things, not complaints or criticisms, but about small, ordinary preferences. She stops politely agreeing with suggestions she doesn't actually want. She'll say she's not in the mood for that restaurant, that she's tired and would rather stay in, that she doesn't actually find that thing funny, even if she smiled the first time she heard it. Most men misread this entirely. They think she's becoming more difficult, or less interested, or pulling away slightly. But the opposite is true. In the early stages of knowing someone, most people filter themselves heavily. They agree more than they actually agree. They laugh more than things genuinely strike them as funny. They perform a version of themselves calibrated to be easy and enjoyable because they don't yet know whether the real version will be accepted. When she starts dropping that performance, she is not becoming harder to please. She is becoming real. And she is only becoming real because she has started to feel safe enough to be real. The first sign that she wants to give herself to you is that she stops editing herself to make you comfortable. We'll come back to that thread, but before we go there, consider the second sign, which tends to arrive around the same time. She starts touching things that belong to you without asking, not in an intrusive or possessive way. She'll reach for your jacket when she's cold without checking whether that's okay. She'll borrow your pen from the table automatically, without the brief hesitation that comes from not feeling entitled to reach into someone else's space. She'll adjust something near you, move something out of the way, use something of yours as though the boundary between what's yours and what's hers has become, at least in small ways, porous. Think about what that porousness actually means beneath the surface. Personal belongings exist within a small sphere of personal space. People who are still maintaining careful distance, who haven't yet decided whether someone is fully safe, tend to respect that sphere without even consciously deciding to. When she stops respecting it, when your things become things she can interact with without seeking permission, she has stopped relating to you as a stranger whose space requires navigating carefully. There is something deeper happening here. The physical boundary between people mirrors the emotional one. When the emotional boundary begins to lower, the physical one tends to follow, almost automatically. She doesn't always know she's doing it. That's precisely what makes it reliable as a signal. Now we move deeper because the third sign is the one that tends to mean the most, and it arrives in a place most people would never think to look. She starts including you in her plans before being invited. Not dramatically, not with a conversation about what you are to each other, but quietly and practically. She'll mention an event she's thinking of going to and say, "We could check it out," without having discussed whether you go places together. She'll plan something for herself and factor in your schedule. She'll use "we" before either of you has formally agreed to be a "we." Most people read this as presumptuous, but the deeper truth is this. When someone begins using "we" before it's been negotiated, they have already made a private decision about the relationship. They have already, somewhere inside themselves, placed you in their future. And the language leaks out ahead of the conversation because language always reflects the internal landscape before the internal landscape has been formally declared. What happens next is important because the fourth sign tends to follow closely once the third one appears, and it operates in a completely different register. She starts asking about your past in a way she didn't before, not the impressive parts, not your accomplishments or your adventures. She starts asking about the parts that didn't go well, the things you regret, the relationship that ended badly and why, the moment you failed at something you cared about, the version of yourself you grew out of and don't talk about much anymore. Imagine this. Someone who is still protecting themselves keeps their curiosity at a safe distance. They want to know the good parts. They want to know the version of you that makes them feel secure in their interest. Asking about your failures, your shame, the darker chapters of your life is something entirely different. It is an act of preparation. She is learning who you actually are beneath the presented version, because she is preparing to be close to the actual person, not just the surface. When she wants to know your shadows, she has decided that what she finds there won't change her mind. She has already made a bet on you. The curiosity about your past is how she's filling in the details of a decision she's already quietly made. But before we go there, the fifth sign is perhaps the most underestimated, and it happens almost entirely in silence. She becomes comfortable being quiet with you. Not the polite quiet of two people who've run out of things to say, the other kind. The settled, undefended quiet of someone who no longer feels the need to maintain a performance in order to justify their presence in the room. She'll sit beside you doing something completely separate, reading or thinking or just existing, without the faint anxiety of wondering whether the silence is uncomfortable, whether she should be saying something, whether the absence of conversation means something is wrong. This kind of quiet is earned slowly. It requires a specific kind of safety most relationships take a long time to build, and some never do. The ability to be silent beside someone without needing to fill the silence with reassurance is one of the purest signs of genuine comfort. It means she no longer needs to manage how she appears to you. She has decided on some level beneath conscious awareness that her unguarded, quiet, unperforming self is welcome here. Now, we move to the deepest layer of all this, and to the sixth sign, which is the one that underlies everything else. She starts asking for things, small things, direct things, without softening the request into a suggestion or wrapping it in enough qualifiers that she can pretend she didn't really ask if the answer is no. She'll say she wants to see you rather than floating it as a vague possibility. She'll ask you to do something specific rather than hinting at it and waiting to see if you'll pick it up. She'll make a direct, unhedged request and wait for your actual response. Consider what it takes to ask for something directly. Every person who has ever been disappointed by someone they needed something from has learned at some point to soften their request into something that can be withdrawn if the answer feels wrong. Asking directly means accepting that you might hear no, and that hearing no will require sitting with the discomfort of having wanted something and not received it. Most people avoid this by asking indirectly, which allows them to preserve the pretense of not having really asked at all. When she asks directly, she has decided that you are someone she can want things from. That asking you, clearly and without performance, is safe enough to be worth the risk of a clear answer. She has placed enough trust in how you handle her requests that she no longer needs the cushion of ambiguity around them. The deepest truth is this: all 6 of these signs are the same sign in different clothing. Dropping the performance of easy agreeableness, touching your things without asking, including you in her future without invitation, asking about your shadows, going quiet without anxiety, and making direct requests. Every one of these is a woman removing layer by layer the careful distance she keeps between herself and people she doesn't yet fully trust. Each one is an act of unguarding, and this is what giving herself actually means, long before any other interpretation. It means deciding that the careful, defended, managed version of herself is no longer necessary around you. It means choosing, one small act at a time, to let the actual person through. This reframes the entire original question. The question most people start with is, how do I know if she's ready? But that question treats readiness as a single threshold, a moment she crosses or hasn't crossed yet. The deeper, more honest question is this: am I the kind of person whose presence makes someone feel safe enough to unguard themselves? because that question puts the answer where it actually lives. Not in reading her correctly, not in catching the right signal at the right time, but in the kind of consistency, steadiness, and genuine attention that creates the conditions where another person slowly decides that being real is safer than being careful. She doesn't give herself to the man who reads her perfectly. She gives herself to the man who makes her feel, through everything he does and doesn't do, that she will be handled with care. If this opens something for you, there is much more beneath the surface of how trust is built in the quiet, ordinary moments most people forget to pay attention to. Stay close. This understanding is only the beginning.